order. You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man.
Bit of light-hearted banter before we get stuck into the heavy stuff. I'm a bit confused because Rowan Atkinson has come out in defence of Boris Johnson's jokes about burqas, but I can't see any columnists or sort of spittle-flecked commentators reminding us that lovies, especially very, very rich lovies, should stay out of politics. I thought when someone like Gary Lineker or Lily Allen or J.K. Rowling, when they come out and say something about politics, they're always told that they're not allowed to because, you know, stay in your lane or stop being such a lovey. Why? I don't. It's very odd, isn't it? Where are all the sort of Daily Mail columns condemning Rowan Atkinson for sticking his oar in to politics? That's very confusing, isn't it? Strange times. Would you like to have your head blown, your mind blown by a little fact that possibly is utterly irrelevant to Rowan Atkinson's intervention on Boris Johnson's burqa debacle? But I think it will blow your mind. I didn't know, and I do this stuff for a living. Do you want to have your mind blown? Something? All right. You're not going to believe this, but you're going to check. Rowan Atkinson's older brother ran for the leadership of UKIP. Boom. Seriously. I'm not suggesting that's got anything to do with anything in particular. I just love little nuggets of trivia like that. But I am confused about, I don't know, where is all the condemnation of Rowan Atkinson for being a big, out-of-touch lovey? Anyway, we digress. You can tell what I'm doing, can't you? I'm putting off the conversation that we have to have now because I really don't want to have it. I'm going to get really upset, and it is not even something I knew about firsthand. Claims of child sexual abuse have been made against 40 monks and teachers at Ampleforth College in North Yorkshire since the 1960s. Downside, which is another Benedictine monastic school, in 2010 established that historical allegations and concerns had been raised by about 16 of its 21 monks. A former headmaster of Downside, as some of these complaints surfaced, was seen to wheelbarrow bales of documents to a bonfire on the grounds of the school.
An independent report into sexual abuse spanning 4 decades at 2 leading private Catholic schools says the attacks on children were likely to be more widespread than previously thought. It found appalling abuse at Ampleforth in North Yorkshire and at Downside in Somerset, and says both institutions tried to cover up numerous allegations. The children as young as 7 were sexually abused by a number of monks who were described as being secretive, evasive and suspicious of anyone outside their Benedictine order. Our religion editor, Martin Bashir, has more.
They decorate some of England's most attractive landscapes. Downside School here in Somerset and Ampleforth in Yorkshire, described as resembling a Harry Potter world of beguiling charm. But within these golden monastic buildings from the 1960s onwards, some teachers sexually abused children as young as 7. Piers Grant Ferris was described as a sadistic and violent abuser at Ampleforth's prep school, where he taught for 10 years from 1965. Seen here on the right in 2006, he was found guilty on 20 counts of indecent assault and was one of 10 staff at the schools to have been convicted or cautioned in the last 50 years. But today's report said the true scale of abuse at Ampleforth and Downside is likely to have been much higher.
This is a very hard-hitting, very serious report that, as I say, over many years showed that the reputation of individuals and the reputation of the institution itself was far more important to people than the safety and the protection of the children.
Former students described their experience. One said the abuse caused him to shut down emotionally. Another victim at Downside begged to be rescued. Those I turned to for help silenced me with guilt and shame, making me believe that I was a sinner. This charity is working with Ampleforth on improving its safeguarding.
The only natural step for them is for outside regulation. That's the only thing that's really going to solve this issue. So the safeguarding and their organisations need to be externally regulated.
The Catholic Church, back in 2001, published its own review of safeguarding, which contained 83 recommendations. But according to today's report, Ampleforth and Downside paid no more than lip service to them. The report points out that other than in the context of this inquiry, no public apology has ever been made to the victims. Today, both schools issued statements saying they acknowledged serious failings in the past and were trying to improve.
Schools should be places of safety for children as well as, of course, for learning. Religious schools have no monopoly on kindness, but there is something profoundly shocking about what the big child abuse inquiry has to say about 2 Roman Catholic boarding schools. It refers to appalling sex abuse of pupils, some as young as 7, at Ampleforth in North Yorkshire and Downside in Somerset, and says it was likely to be worse than previously thought.
Monks hid allegations of appalling sexual abuse to protect the reputation of the schools. Groups of boys were abused at the same time. The blatant openness of the activities demonstrated a culture of acceptance. Pete Saunders, who helps victims of abuse, told me the human impact of this scandal is devastating.
We know people, and I know people, who have tragically taken their own lives because they haven't been able to deal with the impact of what happened to them as a child. But for many others, they will struggle through life. All the survivors that I've spoken to over many, many years, decades in fact, their greatest desire is that nobody goes through what they went through as children.
Father Gregory Carroll from Ampleforth School was sentenced to 4 years in prison in 2005 for child abuse. Dara de Kogan, a teacher also from Ampleforth, was jailed for 28 months last year, guilty of sexually abusing a pupil. In total, 10 individuals from both schools were convicted or cautioned, but the number of victims is considerably higher. Even when a 2001 inquiry into child abuse, commissioned by the Catholic Church itself, came up with recommendations designed to improve the protection of children, today's report found that the 2 schools were hostile towards any attempt to bring in new safeguards or policies.
I'm going to get quite emotional this hour, and I'm going to give you a warning now if you don't like that sort of thing or you don't like this sort of subject matter, because I'm going to think about my late father a lot, and I'm going to think about the sacrifices that my mother made as well to send me to this school, because for them it's almost impossible to express how much it meant to my parents to send me to Ampleforth. It was not just a mark of career success on my father's part, a man who left school at 15, grew up above a pub in Leeds. Not a poor background by any means, it was a very, very successful pub. But he left school at 15, never really set the world on fire academically, doesn't really know, never really remembered why he wanted to be a journalist. It just became an ambition in his early teens, and he stuck with it, and he ended up on the Daily Telegraph, which in those days was not a racist dog whistle cesspit like it is now. It was pretty much the finest newspaper in the world, and to appear on the front page of that newspaper and to send your son to public school, Catholic public school, because my dad was a devout and religious man, was, I realise now, I didn't realise this when he was alive. Don't worry, I'm not going to have a Mike and the Mechanics moment. I'd had plenty of wonderful conversations with him when he was alive about all the great stuff he did. But until, my own children reached certain ages, I didn't understand the importance of this stuff. And for him, it was incredible. I hope I'm communicating this correctly. The parents not everyone is ever going to be able to afford to send their children to private school, but most of the people who do are making sacrifices on a scale that you notice as a kid. We never went abroad for holidays. I think we went to a campsite in Brittany once. We never really went on summer holidays as kids. Mum and Dad made their decisions. And the point about Ampleforth that I don't think you'll get unless I explain this correctly, you're not just sending your son to a school. You're sending your son to a state of mind. You're sending your son to somewhere that you consider to be spiritual, that you consider to be imbuing your child with values, Christian values, proper Christian Catholic values. You won't be surprised to learn that I got into a lot of trouble with the monks, but only through arguing. See, I'm about to say no one ever laid a finger on me, but then you remember the stuff that you just brushed off as a kid, the monks who stood too close to you, the one who used to try and almost pull you down to sit on his knee when you were about 15 years old. But I was 15 years old, so you can use your elbow or you can shrug it off. Most of this abuse was visited upon children in the junior parts of the school I went to. I didn't go to the junior part. But I want you to understand that, because it's not only is it a very important part of this story, it's a very important part of who I am. And what my mum and other mums, and I've heard from a couple of lads since, struggled with yesterday, was the belief that they'd let us down by sending us there. So my entire life has been built upon a sense of gratitude. I am incredibly blessed to have been adopted by the two most wonderful parents anybody could hope for. And I was incredibly blessed, I always thought, to be sent to this school. The guilt I've carried about getting chucked out and breaking their hearts is pretty huge. But what this story has done to thousands of families who made sacrifices and trusted these men, it's made those mums and dads move from thinking that they have made sacrifices and they have made decisions designed wholly to give their children the best possible start in life. They might be wrong, but I don't think they are. But that's what they did. They did it because they thought it was the best possible start in life you could give to your child. And what parent fails to understand that impulse? We can all disagree about what the best start is, but all but the most callous of parents would contend that they want their children to have the best possible start in life. And now mums and dads up and down the country are looking at these schools and looking at their boys, and they're thinking that they let us down. So even though I was never abused, and even though I was never aware of anything like the abuse that has now been revealed in this inquiry, I feel such vicious anger at these men. Because not only did they rape children and then cover it up, the people that never abused children are complicit in this in a way that I am going to struggle properly to articulate. But they've also robbed everybody else. Every other parent that sent their child to this school has been robbed of pride in their own achievements. It makes me want to weep. I don't know how much of the detail that you've seen, but my God, these boys, these poor, poor, poor boys. Their victims were as young as 7 at Ampleforth and 11 at Downside. And do you know what else has come out in this report? Don't worry, I'll be all right. Do you know what else has come out in this report? What's come out in this report is that they bloody knew. The abbots and the headmasters, the housemasters and the teachers who weren't actually raping children, they knew about the monks that were. And they did nothing. That is what I want your help in understanding today, because they weren't bad people. I'm not going to name names, it wouldn't be fair. But I have fond memories of some teachers. Really, really fond memories of some teachers. Teachers that had an influence upon my life that I would contend still shines forth today. One of them got arrested. And even back then, I was with my mate Sam, and we both really liked him. He was a history teacher, he never laid a finger on us. And he got arrested and convicted, and we were so brainwashed by it. We wouldn't try to defend what he'd done, but we'd almost sort of see it as separate from what we knew of him. That's how brainwashed we were. And other teachers who have never been accused of anything, or teachers who clearly have never committed any crimes, I just can't believe today that they didn't know it was happening. And that is, for someone who was not a victim of abuse, that's an almost unbearable burden. An almost unbearable burden, because what the hell were they playing at? And remember, this happened at my prep school as well, where 2 men are now in jail for abusing my school friends in the most vile and unimaginable of ways. But no one else got punished. Headmaster went to his grave. sold the school for millions of pounds. Nobody else got punished. I remember one teacher who I loved, and he left and no one knew why. And I know why now, because he knew that it was happening and he felt there was nothing that he could do about it. What would you do? This is where mandatory reporting becomes so important, where if you think it's happening somewhere, or if someone tells you that it's happening somewhere and you don't report it to the authorities, then you become a criminal. But that makes criminals of almost all of us, of a certain generation. Not my generation, because you can't criminalise a child for being too frightened to blow the whistle upon a rapist monk. But my God, you should criminalise the English teacher and the geography teacher and the French teacher and the maths teacher and the headmaster and the abbot and the housemaster and the deputy housemaster and the head of French and the head of PE or whoever it is, because they can't not have known. And they're the people I want to talk about, and I really would want them to talk to me as well. So I was 12 when my friends were being taken into the dark room at Winterfold House in Worcestershire and being abused by a disgusting man called Jonathan O'Brien. I was 12 years old. And I beat myself up for not having done anything to protect them. I was 12, what can I have done? How the hell do people in their 30s and 40s, when it was going on under their noses, sleep at night? How? How do they do it? Because that's why this stuff happens. Not because of the abusers. The abusers will always be with us. It happens because of the failures of people like you and me to blow the whistle. It's not our fault it happens, but it is our fault it continues to happen. It's not our fault that perverts exist. It's not our fault that some adults want to rape children, but it is our fault when we think it might be happening and do nothing. It is our fault when it happens again. I told you this was going to be tricky. It's 16 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The scale of sexual abuse of children at my school is so unbelievably immense that I want you to tell me, psychologically, behaviourally, even perhaps spiritually. And I want to do it in a slightly sympathetic way, because I'm cross and I'm very upset, of course. But the people who didn't blow the whistle aren't bad people. And it was normal. I mean, look at the BBC with Jimmy Savile and the NHS. Look at all the other institutions that have undergone child sex abuse recently. It's not even extraordinary to reflect upon the people who looked the other way. I don't know if you will have the courage to ring me if you looked the other way a few years ago, wherever you were. But I'd really like you to. I won't hold it against you, but if we can understand how it happens and why it happens, maybe we can play a tiny, tiny little part in ensuring that it doesn't happen again. No, thank you for all your kind words. It is an incredibly important subject and almost uniquely close to my heart. 10 men linked to 2 Catholic monastic schools have been convicted or cautioned for sexual offences against pupils or the possession of child abuse images. But as it was revealed yesterday, as part of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, the amount of children abused at Ampleforth College and Downside is believed to be immense. And listen to this. At Downside in Somerset, a headmaster built a bonfire to burn staff files that may have held incriminating evidence. That's what I don't get. The cover-ups, the complicity. When we got chucked out of school for something utterly incomparable, my 3 best friends and I were thrown out for smoking weed. But we couldn't quite believe, I only realised this morning, I was talking to Nick Ferrari about this earlier, when Mum and Dad got so upset about the school washing their hands of us and trying to claim that the problem had been brought in from home. I wouldn't have known a flipping lump of hashish if I'd sat on it when I was in Kidderminster. It all happened at school, got introduced to it all at school. But the headmaster, who I still thought was a decent man, even as he expelled me, "You realise I have no choice, James. This will mean a parting of the ways." I didn't get what Dad was so cross about. I understood why he was cross when they sent him a bill for the last term's school fees, and I hadn't even been at the school. But he sent that back torn in half, and we never heard from them again. But I didn't understand why they were so cross about that, but now I do, because they trusted these men to look after me. And I made a mess of it, and it's no big deal in the great scheme of things. But when they then turned around and said, oh, no, nothing to do with us, bye-bye, we'll never worry about you again, they were letting down on a tiny scale, my mum and dad. But to read about the rapes, the abuse of children on an industrial scale, that's what I can't understand. All of the other monks in the monastery kneeling down at Vespers, walking in. I'm so sorry, I should take some calls, but I've got quite a lot to get off my chest. Praying and telling us. The night I lost my virginity, I thought I was going to be struck by lightning, because these monks had imbued in me a kind of weird medieval approach to sex and religion. And all the while, they were green lighting the worst sort of abuses by the men sitting next to them at matins, the men sitting next to them in Mass. And they knew. And you wonder, and I know it is, of course, uncomfortable to see people in this country only concerned about the abuse of young people when it's done by brown men. But it's the same. It's the reputation protection. It's the sense that the kids don't matter. That's how it happens on an institutional level, whether it's a monastery or a police service or a hospital or the BBC. It's this notion that somehow protecting the brand is more important than protecting the human beings. And that's the thing I don't get, is the people that must have known and yet did nothing. Matthew's in Shepperton. Matthew, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi there, James. First-time caller.
You've picked your moment.
A few times. Yeah, tell me. I attended a different Catholic boarding school from the two that are being talked about now. However, we did have a teacher in common in that Jonathan O'Brien taught in my first year at the boarding school. Now, he left under a bit of a cloud half-term, and the rumour was because he'd been caught with a boy. But obviously it was just a rumour. None of the teachers, none of the parents were ever involved in discussing that. There was no sort of review taking place. There was no look at whether other children were involved or anything. Now, you mentioned your parents being sort of proud of going to a Catholic, you're going to a Catholic boarding school. Mine were exactly the same. But the adults, the teachers at the school were also Catholics.
Yes.
And they were also under the sway of the Catholic Church in a way that I don't think they really appreciated.
No, no, you're right, maybe. Almost a Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, I think it's incumbent on them now that, you know, we've got a bit of distance from it, there's time. They should now be coming forward and giving the information that they've held for so long.
I know the boy you're talking about.
Oh, right.
I know him well. Messed him up for almost ever. And you're right, they did. They just got him out of the school at half-term, the teacher concerned that you've mentioned. And that was because if what he had done had come out, the school would have been on the front page of every newspaper in the country. The applications would have gone off a cliff. The money upon which the school was running would have dried up. And he wouldn't have been free to go wherever he went next and do whatever he did next.
Yeah, you know, he went on to teach at another school.
I think he did. I mean, I know you were at the Oratory, were you?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's the point, is it? It's not him who I personally swing for. It's not him, is it? It's the headmaster who knew why he was spirited out of the school at half-term and didn't do anything about it. Didn't tell you, didn't tell your parents, didn't tell anybody. And that means that the next person who arrived in that school with similar sick appetites would be free to indulge those appetites until he got caught, and then they'd squeeze him out of the door, and then they'd cover that up, and it just went on and on and on and on and on. And Stockholm Syndrome is a kind way of analysing it. It wasn't just Catholic boarding schools in the 70s and 80s that just treated child sex abuse as something that was a bit of an inconvenience rather than a disgusting and sick crime. But how could they not want to look after the boys? That's what I don't get, Matthew.
Totally. I mean, I sat here sort of, you know, listening to your voice, thinking, I mean, I'm a couple of years younger than you, but listening and thinking back to, you know, my career through Catholic schools and the various sort of brushes that are with scandal that different schools have had.
That's right.
And I think, you know, I'm so lucky to have not been one of those victims. You know,
Oh, we both
could have
are.
been so easily me.
It could have been so easily you. And the lad that you're referring to, and I'm not going to give any further details, but the lad you're referring to was abused at both schools, yours and mine, Winterfold, the prep school in Worcestershire, which now has a completely different regime in place and a completely different management. But, you know, when a kid goes off the rails, you have to wonder why. And if you're really pastoral, if you really care, you'd find out why. You wouldn't just keep punishing him like the headmaster did at prep school. He got beaten more times in a term than anybody else. I know, because I had the record previously. And he knocked my record into a cocked hat. He got beaten more times because he was so naughty. And now we know why he was so naughty. And every other, I'm so sorry, I'm so close to swearing. Every other person in that school must have known what was going on. The one I'd love to talk to is the one that left, because he felt, I presume, he was a brilliant teacher and he never taught again. He turned his back on teaching because I think he knew what was going on and he felt utterly powerless to do anything about it. I looked him up on the internet the other day and he seems to be in a good place, but I would love to talk to him about why he couldn't blow the whistle, because he was solid. He was solid. Matthew, thank you. And you're right, we are lucky because it didn't happen to us, but we carry that burden of knowing it was happening around us for the rest of our lives. And our parents carry the burden of knowing that they sent us there into what they thought was the most beautiful gift you could give to a child, both spiritual, educational. And now they read this stuff and realise that they sent us to hell. Not my personal hell, but my friend's hell. Claims of child sexual abuse have been made against 40 monks and teachers since the 60s. And that is, it looks, from here, the tip of the iceberg. So why don't people blow whistles? 0345 606 0973. And how do we discuss this in a way that makes whistle blowing or reporting more likely in the future? Because you would struggle. It's usually someone big and powerful, you see. Someone with more status and power than you. So you would have to be the one to essentially compromise your own career, your own status, your own position by blowing the whistle. That doesn't come naturally to any of us, does it? How do you make it a natural response to these sort of scenarios? You're listening to James O'Brien in a rather odd mood. State of affairs on LBC, and I'm so grateful to you for all the kind words that are coming in. A culture of sex abuse flourished at Ampleforth and Downside schools, just as it has flourished in the BBC, just as it flourished in the northern towns subject to the grim grooming gangs, just as it flourished in the NHS, just as Jimmy Savile flourished everywhere from number 10 Downing Street all the way to Buckingham Palace. And the question today, because my school is one of these schools, is about the people who knew it was happening and did nothing. I just want to understand them a bit better. James is in Fife. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, thanks for taking the call. I'm really sorry to hear what you went through.
Well, it wasn't me, mate. I mean, I'm going to make that absolutely clear. I was, thankfully, never even touched by these men, but reading about what happened to some of my school friends has not been a happy experience, so thank you.
Sorry. I was similarly abused, I think, on hindsight. I've never thought about it until I heard the broadcast today.
Gosh.
And I've felt so compelled.
What? Go on, take your time. Change your mind if you want. If you just do whatever makes you feel better.
I've just felt so compelled that to pull in and contribute. Sorry.
Hey, got nothing to be sorry for. Ever.
I just remember being at school and the PE teacher phoned the music teacher to explain I've always been in bands and groups and things, and I was going to lay down tracks for a school musical thing, and when I arrived at the music class, the teacher said, "Oh, I thought you would be wearing," and he was able to describe what I was wearing when I was in a PE class.
Yeah.
And the PE teacher had obviously phoned him to tell him what I was going to be wearing. And just things went from there.
Oh, mate. So they were in on it together, so to speak.
I think so. And obviously I won't mention names, but
no.
I had the utmost respect for them.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the hardest thing to get past, isn't it? Is if that combination of authority and kindness.
Yeah, my folks put me to the best school.
Yeah, same here.
Obviously they trusted them. I trusted them. And for me to have came back to my parents and said what had happened, wouldn't my parents feel bad about what they had done, but they had done nothing wrong?
So that's another brilliant point as well, actually, and especially if you carried that sense of gratitude for the sacrifices that parents made to send us to these schools, to turn around and say, well, we would almost not be able to compute it, James, that this wonderful thing was so wrong. So did you realise at the time that what was happening to you was wrong, or
I don't think I did.
No.
At the very time I was like about 13 or 14, and I was like playing in bands for the working men's clubs, so I was young adults that were about 30, 40, 50, 60 years old, and that slap and tickle of what you call it,
yes,
end of peer humour.
Yes.
And you never thought anything of it.
Well, we used to give them nicknames. Everybody listening to this would have had a teacher at their school who had a nickname that was linked to the fact that they were a bit gropey or a bit, pervy Pete or whatever it might be. And that's a brilliant way of describing it. That's what gave it camouflage almost, isn't it? That line between inappropriate behaviour and, sick criminal behaviour, but also jokes about that behaviour gives them a sort of...
You put up with it, you accepted it. That was just that they, for what a bit like Hattie Jakes and Sid James...
Yeah, okay.
On humour.
I think that makes perfect sense. Almost everybody listening will as well. And yet I'd never really thought of it that way. Have you ever spoken to anybody about what happened?
I haven't. This is the first time. I've literally, when I say to your advisor, I just had to pull out because so many things resonated to me on the back of the vile things that have happened at your former school.
Yes.
With people that that must hurt like a dagger. I just had to pull in and dial, and I've sat and waited 15 minutes to talk because I wanted to. And I don't think necessarily all these people are bad people. I think sometimes it's expected of them. I can't defend them. I can't see the justice or the why. I just feel confused.
Yes, me too. Me too, because you're right. They did. Some of them were nice. Some of them did good things. I'm not really talking about. Well, I guess even the abusers were charismatic. The fellow who rang in about the teacher we had in common, he wasn't a dirty git in a old raincoat. He was the glamorous young teacher who taught us all tennis and drove a VW Golf. We thought he was cool.
Yeah.
What?
I'm sorry, I'm just gobsmacked.
Hey.
I just feel... I feel better having spoken to you.
Good. Well, that's a relief.
I've done it on national radio.
Sometimes that's what's necessary, oddly, because it gives you an anonymity that you wouldn't have if we were sitting alone together in a room, or if you were talking to someone you knew. Weirdly, that I worked this out a few years ago when we were talking about similar issues, but not quite so personally as you and me are now. It gives you an anonymity that is quite liberating.
Yeah. It does, and I think if more people picked up the phone, maybe not to a radio show, but maybe to somebody they trusted.
Yeah.
I've been successful in everything that I've done. I don't feel bad. I don't hold any grudges.
No.
I don't want to stick the knife in anybody. I don't want to get back at anybody. But these things happened.
Yeah. And you just want it out there.
Yeah. And this is an amazing channel. I feel quite liberated.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Morning.
I'm so glad. Thank you, mate.
Thanks.
No, thank you. And well done, if that's an appropriate thing to say. I have a feeling that it is, but, you know, we're all in the dark a little bit on this. Thank you, James. Take care and God bless. 11:42 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Philip's in Norbury. Philip, what would you like to say?
I'm going to feel a bit of the way that guy felt.
Really?
I'm completely from the other end of the spectrum. I was a teacher in a really nice little school in the South London, really nice. And after a short while, I realised that one of the other members of staff was very interested in a particular type of boy, and it became quite obvious. And I asked a few questions and discovered things like there was a swimming pool inside the school, and he was going in there and insisting that the boys didn't wear their costumes and so forth, and he was going in there naked as well. I got very worried, and then it turned out he was interfering with a few. So I went to the headmistress, and I reported it, and oh yes, I'll do something about it. So she called him into the office and said, did you blah, blah, blah? And he said, oh, no, of course not. I wouldn't do anything like that. And she accepted it.
Yeah.
Well, now, I had reported it, and this is sort of referring to you saying about the other masters at your school.
Yes.
Okay. I felt really quite worried about it, and I'd spoken to another friend, and in fact he had gone in with me, another teacher, and I thought, no, I can't. So I went back to the headmistress and said, sorry, but he has done it. I know he's done it. You go into his room, he'll be sitting with a boy in his lap with his hands in his groin. And she said, oh, are you sure? And I said, please do something. She brought in the district inspector, and they called him once more to the office. No, Mr. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Did you do this? Oh, of course not. I give you my word. And they let him go.
Yeah.
I felt very, very distressed about that, but I thought, I didn't even think about going to the police. I thought I had done enough, but I felt guilty. I mean, I felt guilty, James, believe it.
Yeah, of course.
Until minutes ago, when talking to the girl on the phone, she was so compassionate, and I thought, you will not believe it. This guy, when that particular headmistress retired, he was the interim headmaster.
Unbelievable.
During which time he was at it everywhere. Everybody on the staff knew it. And the only thing that actually saved more children from being interfered with was he was, as I said, interested in a particular type of boy.
Yes.
And this particular type of boy happened to be, we had a schoolkeeper who had a son who was copy and paste of that kind of boy.
Right.
She saw him in the bathroom one day, as a good mummy does, make sure that you wash your tiddly bits and so forth. Oh, Mr. B told me how to do it, and then she saw this kid, basically clinging inside his foreskin.
Yeah.
And the next day, he disappeared. We never saw him again.
The teacher. So he picked the wrong victim on that occasion, but the rest of the time, his denial was enough.
Honestly, James, since that, I mean, this is years ago.
I can tell.
I haven't taught in that school for, gosh, I don't know, but I still feel
did more than any teachers at my schools, Philip.
I'm shaking, absolutely.
I'm not surprised, mate. And what's astonishing for both of us is that we presumed somewhere inside ourselves that this was really extraordinary behaviour, really exceptional conduct, really, really weird. And what we're learning, and what this astonishing report about my school has made clear, is that this was so endemic. And the only way we can begin to understand how it could have been so endemic is by listening to people like you telling us what happened when you actually found the courage. Because you were compromising your own career, potentially. You could have been the troublemaker. You could have been the one that was invited to quietly leave the school because you can't stay on the staff of someone you've accused wrongly of such a vile crime. You've given us an idea of how it can be ongoing.
You see, I was brought up in Western Australia where they had a very similar situation with there was a monastery which ran a lot of boys' education, and they actually had a list of preferences. And I thought, oh no, this is just it's urban myth. Nothing would be like this. But of course, I've listened to you. I've listened to you forever, and I've heard about your school and so forth.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe. Anyway.
This is up and down, and this is just 2 schools from the inquiry, and it's not just schools, and it's not just Catholics, and it's not just monks. Philip, thank you so much. It's 11:48. Thinking of Philip, but more so of James in Fife, who I can't quite believe the words that I'm about to say, who'd never really told anyone before about being abused as a boy. There's a rather wonderful organisation called the Truth Project, which was set up for victims and survivors of child sexual abuse to share their experiences in a supportive and confidential setting, because, as James quite rightly pointed out, ringing a national radio station to do it may seem a little odd. It does actually make sense. That point I made about anonymity is something I gave a lot of thought to when it first started happening on the programme a few years ago. And it is part of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. So if you want to find out more about that, it's truthproject.org.uk. As we contemplate 2 Catholic schools having a culture of acceptance over sexual abuse of children, something that so violently and completely confounds the expectations of the mothers and fathers who sent their children to these schools, that we focus today on every aspect of the story, but chiefly the bystanders, actually, the people who knew and did nothing. This fellow was my, let me find you the right quote. I probably won't be able to now. Yeah, this fellow was my housemaster briefly. He ended up as abbot between 1997 and 2005, Timothy Wright. And the quote from the report is, clung to outdated beliefs about paedophilia and had an immovable attitude of always knowing best. An immovable attitude of always knowing best. He's the one that banned my magazine for asking uncomfortable questions about homosexuality and bullying in the school and stuff like that. It got unbanned subsequently after Cardinal Basil Hume, the Archbishop of Westminster, intervened. God, it was weird, that period of my life. But yeah, that was part of it, actually, that they decided what was right and what was wrong. And it's funny because, I'm going to possibly surprise you now, but I want you to understand what James in Fife, I know that call's going to stay with all of us for quite a long time, but what he was trying to express when he talked about the seaside postcard carry-on film type, utterly innocuous culture, but creating an air where you could somehow persuade yourself that if a teacher touched you inappropriately, it was just like Sid James and Barbara Windsor in Carry On Up the Khyber or what. I think, well, either you get it or you don't. I know exactly what he was talking about. Because there was another teacher at the school, and I'll tell you something he said once, and you might be shocked, but it really made me laugh at the time. And I don't know whether or not this is evidence of me having been to a very low level sort of brainwashed or sucked into a mindset that was unhealthy, or whether it was just a little bit of harmless smut. But I played bottom in the Midsummer Night's Dream, about 10 years after Rupert Everett played Titania in the same play at the same school. And this wonderful old English teacher who I still think of very fondly, and I've spoken to Rupert Everett about this, and we both chuckled away wildly. He was very, very camp. He was never, ever implicated in any dodgy behaviour whatsoever, but he joked in ways that would probably get him thrown out of every school in the country today, and possibly rightly. One of the things he once said, he said something like, James O'Brien's bottom. He said it in an English class the morning after we'd done the play, and he knew exactly what he was playing at. He said, James O'Brien's bottom is the finest thing I've seen on the Ampleforth stage since Rupert Everett's Titania. And we all thought that was hilarious. And I wonder now whether that attitude or that... I mean, I was a 16, 17-year-old boy, a young man, making a joke, and it was a deliberate pun, otherwise it wouldn't have made any sense at all. There's no way my performance was comparable to Rupert Everett's. I don't, for the record, think it was a particularly accurate compliment either, if that's how you want to construe it. But that's what James was talking about. That was the way in which you could just sort of, you know, normalise the behaviour by creating an environment where the conversations were unquestioned. And he, for the... I don't know why I'm concerned about his reputation, but I am still. He was never accused of anything inappropriate. 11:55 is the time. Rupert is in Redruth. Rupert, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I was on that stage with you, believe it or not.
Shut up.
I was playing the player Queen, ironically.
Well, no, that's a small world, isn't it?
It is. I don't remember your bottom, though.
No, don't worry. It's just as well. I remember the donkey's head. Are you sure? I did. Well, obviously you were there.
I do, yeah. I remember it quite clearly.
How are you doing, mate? How are you getting on with this? Because I'm not doing so well.
I'm not doing great. No, I have to say it's left me very, very angry, very embarrassed at you know, having been a pupil there. Really, it's you know, the abuse is one thing, but I think what annoys me most, and Timothy Wright was also my housemaster, it is the kind of deliberate concealment of it all. It just smacks of real genuine arrogance and kind of we know best. And they actually sent out a letter to all the old Amplefordians. You may have received it yourself. And I responded to it because I just felt it was totally kind of not inappropriate necessarily, but just didn't get the tone right whatsoever. I still don't think that they have quite grasped the horrific offences that occurred and the gravity of them, the accusations that have been levelled at them. And, you know, I just...
And so, some of the people are still there. That's the point as well. I'm going to read the letter, actually, because, you know, we may as well go all in. Hey. Dear old Amplefordians, the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse have today published their report on Ampleforth, and we wanted to share our response to the report with you. We are committed to providing the highest possible standards when it comes to looking after those entrusted to our care, and have welcomed the opportunity to work with IIXA on this wide-ranging inquiry into the best ways to protect children. It's glib PR speak. That's what you mean, isn't it? That we have publicly accepted responsibility for past failings on many occasions, and the Ampleforth of today has never been afraid to learn difficult lessons. Well, zip-de-doo. We would like to thank Professor J and her team for the hard work that has gone into this comprehensive and extensive report, and we will review it to identify anything that could inform our constant drive for improvement. I want to read words like shame. I want to read words like disgust. I want to read words like incredible. I want to read words like unjustifiable. I want to read words like sorry in 40-foot-high fonts. And we get a PR thing that's obviously gone to committee before it's been sent out to not just you and me, but also the lads who were raped.
Well, it's taken them 8 paragraphs in that letter to get to an apology, and that's not a direct apology. It's the reference to an original apology that was made, and they say, you know, we would also like to once again offer a heartfelt apology to anyone who suffered abuse while in the care of our schools parish. I mean, that's not, in my opinion, acceptable as a response to this, you know, to this report.
I've got something else I'm going to read you. I agree with you completely. This is completely anonymous and off the record, but you know this lad. He got in touch with me last night, and I can't read out everything he said. In response to getting this letter, I'd have preferred it if they'd emailed an apology to my mother.
I called my mother last night, actually, and I said to her, look, I'm calling you because I want you to know that I don't hold you in any way responsible for, you know, sending me to what has turned out to be, as you quite rightly put it, a hellhole. You know, it's...
Well, we had some good times, mate. Let's not... this is the point, isn't it? I know it will sound odd to people that perhaps haven't been in that kind of environment, but we had some really, really good times.
Absolutely, and for that reason, I was always, until recently, very, very proud of having, you know, gone to that school, and I talked in great detail to lots of people and lots of friends about the benefits that I you know, received from it. It made me who I am today in many ways, and I hope that's a good person generally. And you know, this is why it's just felt so raw and so horrible to. I mean, I've been following this story for a while now. This is the official report that's come out.
That's right.
And you know, it just has left me totally breathless in many ways.
Because the ones we liked knew. That's the thing. You can process the ones that did it being scum. You can close your mind and your heart to them. But the ones we liked and trusted must have known.
To me, it was the discovery that the person who was taking the role of my mother and father, effectively, for you know, pretty much 40 weeks of the year, had been directly responsible for packing off these paedophiles to some backwater parish somewhere, and you know, and then it turns out they do it to kids there.
Altar boys, that's what they'd do. They'd get them away from the school and just stick. And there's a class element to that as well, because the lads that would be serving mass as altar boys in a parish well, I won't mention any specific areas in case it's too close to the bone, but they won't have been at schools like ours. They won't have been from the same background that we were from. It was almost as if the abbots and the decision makers thought, well, if he does carry on abusing, at least it won't be Amplefordians that he's abusing.
Can I ask you a question? Have you been in touch with many ex sort of colleagues and?
I was in touch with Adam last night. You remember who I got chucked out with? We we bumped into each other. Well, we've kept in touch over the years, and I haven't been on Facebook actually yet because I'm friends with a lot of the old boys from my house on Facebook, but I haven't. And then I read you that message I got from someone who I'm not going to identify.
I've talked to a few people about it. And
how are they processing it? What's going on?
I've sent a little bit of kind of almost shoulder shrugging and acceptance, and there doesn't seem to be much in the way of indignation or...
it's a hard vocabulary. It's a discomforting conversation, and it's a tough vocabulary. I'd be surprised, but I mean, that's what you found. Maybe they haven't read it yet. Maybe it hasn't actually properly registered yet just how much and how vile it was.
Possibly.
We'll find out. Look after yourself, Rupert.
You too. Thanks, James.
Take care. It's one of those days where the cart leads the horse. There's so many people waiting to talk about this horrible subject. I'm not gonna leave them hanging on the switchboard. There's no way we're going to be able to talk to everybody who wants to talk. But if you were listening in the last hour, you'll know that some of the people who rang in were telling us stuff that they've never told anybody before. That's quite a burden, actually, especially on a day when I'm thinking of my friends who were raped and abused and molested by the men that our parents trusted them so much. This is the point people miss about boarding schools, especially religious boarding schools. They trusted them so much they thought that they could do a better job of bringing us up than our mums and dads could do. Not having the boarding school debate today, but that is the level of trust that my dad had in these men. Do you know what? I'm glad he's not here to see this. He felt let down enough by the way my premature departure from the school was handled. Although we could laugh about that before I lost him. Could laugh about everything, actually, but we wouldn't have been able to laugh about this. Tell me about bystanders. Or why... Because some people listening to this will be thinking, well, I'd have punched his lights out, or I'd have done this, or I'd have told my dad. And I get that. But boarding schools make it harder. Not just boarding schools where this stuff happens. Just trying to talk. The more we talk, the more light is shone into the darkness, the more light that is shone into the darkness. Forgive me, I'm going to go a bit poetic. The less darkness there is at the end. So keep shining. Mickey's in Edinburgh. Mickey, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there, James. Nice to speak to you.
Yeah, likewise. Could maybe have been a happier subject, eh?
Well, I'm sure there are happier ones. What spurred me to call was I heard Jim. Was it Jim in Fife?
James in Fife, yeah.
James in Fife. And that rang a bell with me. I'm 57. I'll be 50 in September. I've never spoken to anyone about this either. And so, firstly, I wanted to phone in to support him, say he's not the only one. I'm sure there's
Good
many.
man. Of course.
What happened with me, I was on the Scouts, and we had this Indian dancing trip, like native Indian. It was grand. We had these wonderful outfits, and we just used to wear, we would get stripped, and they cover us with this red paint, put a loincloth on us, and we had, I had this big eagle outfit with the wings and everything. You know the story about the brave goes into the mountain, has to get an eagle's feather and come back and become a brave.
Yeah.
And brave's not really the word that I should associate with this. However, after the shows, we used to travel all around. Then we'd be lined up, you'd be standing, we called him Skip, he was the leader of the trip, in the bath, and they had the shower handle in his hand, and he'd wash all his red paint off us. Yeah. However, with loincloths on, we didn't have red paint on our genitals, but he paid particular attention to making sure they were hygienic for us.
That's the second time we've heard that particular tactic in just an hour and 10 minutes. Yeah.
Right.
No, I'm saying it's a known modus operandi for these people, because you can persuade yourself, as I suspect you probably did, that it might feel a bit weird, but it's washing. It can't be that weird.
That was my point.
Yeah.
But we had no idea. We couldn't work with. I'm saying we had no idea. We couldn't work out that there was a bit of japery, you know.
Yes, I do.
But you felt incredibly uncomfortable, you know, with an older man massaging your genitals.
Yeah.
And we all saw this happen to each other because we were all lined up, and nobody said a word, not one word. And occasionally we get one, and my friend Ian, and he turned to me and he says, while he was washing him, he says, "Well, I chastised him." I didn't even know what chastise meant. Yeah. And I went, "Yeah," you know, and he grabbed him quite roughly by the genitals, and Ian gasped and was like, looked in shock and horror. Now, we were like, this had happened 12, 13, 14 years old.
Yeah.
Now, this was never mentioned once outside, even between us.
No.
It was not a word was said. Now, this guy, Skip, was a senior social worker in the area, and so I presume knew a bit about psychology and whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know if he bargained on the fact that we would never say a word. However, we didn't. Even I knew a lot of these guys in their late 20s, and we used to speak about the great times we had in the Scouts and everything, but that was never mentioned, not even as we were adults.
Because of embarrassment?
Because we felt we did something wrong by letting it happen, not saying anything, not doing anything. We were like absolutely stone cold with embarrassment. Yeah. You could not say a word. Now, as an add-on to that, I, from the age of 6, was being sexually abused within my family.
Oh, mate.
Okay. Now, so I was probably the most experienced victim of the lot of us.
That's one way of putting it.
If you want to call it experience.
Yeah.
So I should really have been...
Oh, don't do that to yourself. No, you shouldn't.
But that's how you feel.
No, I know it is, but you mustn't, Mickey. You mustn't.
So anyway, when I started...
You were the one that needed the most help, not the one that had the most responsibility to report it. You were the one that deserved even more concern and compassion than your schoolmates because of what was going on at home. Don't ever, 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 ever let yourself feel bad about not being the one that blew the whistle because you were enduring more than the rest of them, mate.
Yeah, but this was just getting your genitals washed by an old man.
Yeah.
It was nothing compared to what was happening to me. So I felt, well, this is not so bad for me, but it's probably worse for them. Because,
oh, man alive. You're a good man, Mickey.
So the thing is, anyway, what happened is I got, by about 15, I started sort of mumbling and groaning and so I got shipped off to my grandparents in Donegal.
Just got you out of the way.
Aye, right? So I'm out the way, my family's in the clear, Skip's in the clear, and the rest of the boys are saying nothing.
Yeah.
And this is how these people get away with this.
It is. It is.
And this is why it can take 57, nearly 58 years. Doesn't seem that long a time.
I know.
But you know, that Skip's probably, conceivably, in his 80s still alive. I don't know. So people, you were talking about Jimmy Savile, people like that. People in respected positions, people that were admired or looked up to.
Well, they're hiding in plain sight. That was the phrase that Ian Hislop used, I think, to describe Jimmy Savile, and it resonates with me every time we talk about stuff like this. They're hiding in plain sight.
Right, but the contrast of things for me was, I think there must have been, because there were rumours, adults kind of had an idea he was maybe a bit ropey.
Yeah.
This guy.
Yeah, but they didn't. I mean, this isn't a defence or an excuse. It wasn't treated with the gravity then that it is treated with today. I think it's important for perhaps younger listeners to understand at least an element of that. It wasn't something that got the response it should always have got, and which it does get today. People could almost brush it off, couldn't they?
Well, I think certainly I'm talking about the late 60s, 70s.
Yeah, well, there you go.
And then it wasn't a big issue. People did turn their cheeks. I mean, I know several other stories. But,
yeah, of course.
The crucial thing for me is that we as children turned the other cheek also.
You mean you look the other way?
Exactly.
Yeah, I wish I could help you more with that, because I really wish you weren't beating yourself up for that. What are you going to do? Grown men, positions of authority, head of social services or whatever, scoutmaster, all of these people were, they had so much power. And in my school, then you factor in the clerical power that they had, the biblical authority, if you like, or the religious authority. Mate, there's no way you could have done anything differently. You weren't looking the other way. You weren't turning the other cheek. You were not doing anything culpable or anything to be ashamed of or to feel guilty about. And I know these are just words, aren't they? They're just words.
Well, the other thing is, we admired this man greatly.
That's the point.
This man taught us life lessons, how self-respect, respect for others, really genuine, important life lessons. Life lessons a bit of a cliche, but I think
I get it.
Know what I mean.
I do.
And so, not only did we turn the other cheek for our own reasons of our childish minds, what we thought or felt, but I could not turn the man in.
Because of some warped sense of loyalty.
Exactly.
I know.
And so I end up getting rattled where the sun don't shine. And it's not until you grow up and you're older and you think, oh, well, really, that's not the best thing that could have happened to you. And what do you do? What I do now, I just have this worm at the back of my head burrowing away for 57 years. And,
you can get it out, and the way to get it out is to shine the light in and talk and stop beating yourself up and stop feeling bad. The only person who should feel guilt or shame is him.
Well, I'll say thanks to James and Fife for making me talk for the first time.
Well, God bless you.
Okay, thanks, James.
Take care, Mickey. Having the strangest and the hardest conversation I've ever had in all my years as a whatever I am, a journalist, a broadcaster, because it's my school this time in the news, and it is an astonishing catalogue of crimes committed by men that we trusted, and men that our parents trusted so deeply that they thought they'd somehow do a better job of raising us than they would do themselves. And that's it, really. I don't know. I know some of the callers have been quite harrowing, but some of the some of the details of this case about what went on at my school, I'm not sure I can properly share with you at this time of day, especially in the school holidays. I mean, I doubt anyone's still listening to this if they've got small children with them. But some of the stuff is it's almost unbelievable. I didn't know about this on any level, but lots and lots of people did. And they're the people I'm most confused by and let down by today. 03456060973. At Ampleforth and Downside, a number of allegations were never referred to the police, but were handled internally. Which is odd, really, because this is my era, and when they found out we were smoking dope in the woods, they called in Humberside Drug Squad faster than you could say, ooh, scandal. And they found out boys were being raped by monks. They didn't phone the police. Strange. Michael's in Harrow. Michael, what would you like to say?
Hello, Michael. I think your last point was a very clear, poignant point to the whole thing. I was molested by a Catholic priest as a child. He was from the same village in Ireland as my mother. I was 13, 14. Come and be the altar boy for me. Stay over in the night in the house. I didn't understand it. My parents were so devout Catholics that the fact that I was staying with a priest was a sign of status.
Did you know, we went off once, Michael, on a pilgrimage. Not a pilgrimage, they sent us to do work in one of the parishes, and a sort of third or fourth cousin, she was Irish, that's why I remember her now as you speak, of my dad's family, who we'd never heard of, we didn't even know she existed, but she knew that Jim O'Brien's boy had gone to Ampleforth College because it was as part of her parish. And her religion, it was such an achievement. So to be staying with a priest, I understand exactly how your family felt about that.
It happened. I didn't understand it. Because my parents were such devout. I didn't even get the birds and the bees. So it happened to myself and my brother. And we froze a bit. We couldn't talk about it. And we left it. And then he came back when I was 17 and stayed the night, and he said, I'm in psychotherapy because of the things that were happening. I'm dealing with them and I'm sorry. But he actually said to my mum when I was 18, does Martin want to share, does Michael want to share the bed with you? He said.
Yeah.
And I just thought, my God, I don't believe this. I then went on and trained to be a social worker.
Oh, yeah.
I moved to London, and then my mum said, he's in London. So I got in touch with him. He was in very, very intensive therapy, 5 times a week, I think.
So are we talking about the priest now? We're
talking about the priest.
Yeah, okay. So he was trying to fix himself, was he?
He was trying to fix himself.
Right.
I'll fast forward slightly.
Well, take all the time you want, my friend, all the time you want.
And then, so he was having therapy, and then we kind of introduced my mum again. The priest is back again, using this wonderful sign of my status. And he molested one of my cousins in Ireland, who unfortunately died, and he hung himself. And it was tragic. And he did actually say to me, I'm afraid I did what I did to him, to you.
Jesus.
I did to you, to him. And so because I couldn't deal with it, I didn't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And then I started working as a children's social worker, and I ended up in court with a case. And the association thing is very powerful with child abuse. But if you were abused perhaps as a teenager, and then you go on and have children yourself, and then they're teenagers, it triggers that are then triggered, and you then remember what happened. I buried this so deeply.
Yeah.
It was nowhere. It wasn't. It didn't even. I felt sorry for him. Is the thing that now I kind of kick myself about. But I ended up. It was 1990, early 90s, and I came home and I said to my wife, and I told her, and she was heartbroken. And I had...
That was the first time you'd spoken fully, was it, to anyone about it?
I've never told anybody about it. And then 6 months later, talking, I was doing some research in something, and my brother said, you do know what happened to us with him, don't you? and it hit me. It hit me like a lead balloon in the stomach. And I thought, my God, it is. I'd never wanted to face this. And I arranged to go, and he was in the Midlands, in the Order's main headquarters. I'm not going to name them.
Okay.
And he said, and I said, oh, I'm going to pop in and see you for coffee. And I had a mini tape recorder in my pocket, and I went into a room, and I confronted him, and he spilled like a baby, and you would have thought he was the victim rather than me. And I said, I don't want anything to do with you ever again. And having done that, I sat on the tape for a few years.
Yeah.
And then in mid-90s, my cousin, whose brother hung himself, she got in touch with me, and she said there were rumours going all around the village about the priest, and can we come and see you? And my mum was over there at the time, and she couldn't cope with it. She just found it so hard to deal with. I then went to a contact in the Metropolitan Police PFI unit, an officer there who was a great guy. He had the FBI, he had the European police orders, he had the Irish police. They looked everywhere, but they couldn't find him anywhere. And then it turned out he was down at there was a therapy centre down in Surrey where they used to treat paedophiles. It's now been closed down. Mm. And he was in there, and the officer went and arrested him and bailed him. And the order did then. They spilled the beans. They said, oh, we've got all this file and he did all this, and when we're trying to contain it. He'd been in Japan, he'd been all over Ireland, he'd been in the UK. He was a prolific paedophile. It went to court in 20 years ago, and he was convicted, and then he was repatriated to Ireland, and has faced numerous other court cases. Really? Because I had the courage to deal with it, and I went. And I suppose the lesson that his case was mentioned in the Irish Review of Child Abuse. Yeah. And where everybody else had gone to the orders and gone to the parish priest and gone to the bishop, it actually stated, well, we had no direct control over this because he went to the police, so we were informed that it happened. So if you'd gone to the diocese or you'd gone to the church, they'd have moved him. They'd have just stuck him on a plane or a train and out of sight, out of mind. I met with the head of order after the court case, and I got this, oh, we didn't know what he was. We just thought he was a bit weird and a bit strange. No. And but when I read this report, I wanted to ring that guy. Yeah. I really wanted to swear at him. Just you really knew what this comeback was about. Yes, because you did. I did, yeah. And I moved forward with it. And I'm now back because I couldn't work with children. I took the decision: if I can't deal with this myself, yes, I have to be honest enough not to work with children until I resolve this issue. Sure. And now I'm back working with children, and I'm fine. Fantastic. And I've been great since. But I've had a real wobble today. This is really upsetting. I'm sure it does. But my goodness me, what a fine thing you did. What a fine thing you did, albeit that you've described it in ways that makes it very, very, very easy to understand why it took so long. Can I ask you a slightly odd question? Would you mind? Of course you can. Thanks, man. Do you still go to church? I do, actually. I thought you might. Yeah. We're a weird species, us humans, aren't we, Michael? Mm-hmm. I think so. And I suppose it's just one of those things that don't ask me to explain it. No, I wouldn't. I mean, also, we go to church, and the priest that we see now is a good man. It doesn't do one or even a million rotten apples doesn't mean every apple you'll ever see will be rotten. And of course, the irony is that I don't believe it's the whole church. I think it's a percentage. But I suppose the analogy that I would use that describes this is that I remember all the child abuse scandals in children's homes that went on, And I remember Margaret Hodge in the 90s. There was a big scandal.
In Islington.
That's the one. And you know, how dare you say that we did this?
Yeah.
She went on to be children's minister. And then ultimately, I understand that the main whistleblower in that case had a public apology in Islington Town Hall.
He did. I mean, only because I'm like you, finding this all very harrowing. I've forgotten his name. I think it might have been Andre something, but you're right. And that speaks of institutional attitudes that were by no means confined to the Catholic Church, local councils, everything. Are you all right?
I'm fine. I'm really pleased you got this today.
Oh, I'm glad you did as well. I really am. And what an amazing story. What an amazing story. And I mean, for want of a better phrase, one with a happy ending isn't quite the right phrase, but at least some sort of closure. Justice. There you go. A story with justice. Most of the stories we've heard today, a bit short on justice. God bless Michael. It's 12:36. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are continuing with our conversation about the two Catholic schools. It's a tip of an iceberg, obviously, but yesterday's revelations and reports from the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse focused on two Catholic schools, including my own, where appalling abuse, sadistic and sexual, was commonplace. Here's one. I haven't given much by way of detail, but there's a line in it that really stuck with me because I didn't recognise it, and yet the evidence is incontrovertible. Many perpetrators did not hide their sexual interests from the children. This is so chiming, isn't it, with what we've heard from callers. The showers in particular being a place where the behaviour would be public. The blatant openness of these activities demonstrates there was a culture of acceptance of abusive behaviour. There really was. Boys were made to strip naked and were beaten. Some were allegedly forced to give and receive oral sex, both privately and in front of other pupils. Alleged abuse, I can, but I'm not going to because I don't know who you've got in the back of the car with you today. And these monks, as Michael pointed out there, Michael, who took a tape recorder with him decades after being abused and nailed the priest that had abused him. It's the other people, not the ones that abused these lads. The ones that must have known and did nothing, that I'm not sure I'll ever fully understand. But I'm not going to read out many of the kind words that are coming in, very supportive. And I am going to read out one of them, and I'm just going to make sure I get it absolutely right, because it's not the only one we've received on this theme today. Good afternoon. I wanted to extend a tweet of gratitude to LBC, yourself and your callers. I just created this account to tell you that after 22 years, the time has come to speak to someone about what I went through. Thank you. Have a great weekend. It's a nice sort of deflating greeting at the end of it. And that's, I don't know, I'm not going to dress it up. That's not why we do what we do or anything like that. I'm talking about this today because I had to, and I can. But everyone who's rung into me, some of them felt that they had to. All we can give them is the they can. Andy's in Heathfield. Andy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I just really want to echo what everyone else has said as well. What you've said is a great platform, what you've done for all these people who have come on and told about their stories. I witnessed and was involved in child sex abuse on an industrial scale at my school in Manchester, in just outside Altrincham.
Yeah.
And I saw it on a daily basis. And what I find difficult now is the main teacher was convicted, and I believe he comes out next year.
Yeah.
But there was 40 of us who went to court to testify against him. And the experience in the courtroom was just like being in class, because we saw him again for the first time in, I'm 45 now, so 30 odd years, and it was frightening. And I'm 6'2" and 17 stone, and I'm scared.
Really?
Yeah, it's frightening. And exactly what you've said before is what happens now. All the teachers knew about it.
Yeah.
All the teachers knew about it. He was the disciplinarian in the school.
Yeah.
and the teachers fed the children to him. And it was awful. It was really, really bad. And what angers me now is every one of us who testified against him, I would say 90% of them all have problems in their lives.
Yeah, I bet.
Whether it's alcohol abuse, drug abuse, or unable to form decent partnerships with the wives. That is what I'm finding hard now. So there's no justice.
There'll be an epidemic of undiagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder as well.
It's a tip of the iceberg. This is a tip of the iceberg. And there's people, your research was asking me before, there's people still coming now from that school. Every week, someone else is popping their heads up saying, yeah, it happened to me as well. And that was between, I think it was 1970-odd right away to 1990.
It's incredible. It's almost, you know, the more we talk, the more we try to understand why it wasn't blown wide open. It's almost as if the answer to that is the scale. It was too huge to actually tackle. You know, the behaviour was too gross. The number of survivors, or at the time victims, was too high, and the status of the perpetrator was too big to actually think, I could take this guy on, I could do this. And then the teachers...
Trial,
yeah, go on.
Because the trial of this, the amount of evidence, the amount of research you had to do, it had to be over 3 trials.
God.
It had to be over 3 trials. So just the people that have come forward at the tip of the iceberg, it must have happened a hell of a lot more. And that all the teachers surely must have knew about it. They knew about it.
They must have done. That's the bit, isn't it? You're like me. And I wasn't. I stress again for anyone who's just joining us. I was lucky. I didn't come into
I wasn't lucky.
I know you weren't, mate.
But it doesn't matter. Even if you were there, like you said before, it's the chap from Fife. Yeah. It's the Sid James postcards.
Yeah.
And that's how they got away with it.
The funny comments. Almost the sort of camp humour.
Camp humour, yeah. And it's just vile and disgusting. And
did it feel better when he got sent down?
No.
Not at all?
No, not at all. I did for a bit. I got the phone call from the police saying, yeah, we won the case. But there was a book written about the case as well, and we went to the book launch, and that would be all messed up again.
Yeah.
And no, I don't feel any better for it.
Have you spoken to anyone? Have you had therapy?
Yeah, all the time.
Because you're
all the time.
Very fluent.
All the time, but it doesn't really help. It opened wounds more than anything, probably.
You can't undo it.
And you can't do it now. It's like a Pandora's box.
Yeah.
This is. I appreciate you're very busy, and thanks for.
I'm not. It's got all the time, all the space you need. You can.
I'm sure you've got lots more people coming on.
I wish with all my heart you were wrong, mate. But you're right.
Yeah, I know. Oh, okay.
Look after yourself.
Good luck.
Hey,
have a great weekend.
Yeah, mind how you go. Seriously. It's coming up to 1:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And I mean, we've got no sort of pat little comments to make today, or certainly none of my little snide asides or anything like that. It's just gross. It really is. Some breaking news for you from the other side of the Atlantic. I know no more than this. Police are urging people to stay in their homes in New Brunswick in Canada, with their doors locked at this time for their safety. That's at least 4 people have been killed in a shooting in Canada. And the Fredericton Police Twitter account says an incident has resulted in at least 4 people killed. So more on that as and when the details emerge. It's 12:45. Richie is among my favourite correspondents. He makes an interesting point today. You might be well placed to have insight as to why some kids were targeted by the abusers and others were avoided. I don't know about that. The Inquiry's just been in touch as well via Twitter to ask if I want to talk to them. But I don't think I've got anything to say. anything more than I would say here to you. Richie goes on, there might be a forum and audience you could contribute to help raise awareness and prevent future abuse, meaning somewhere other than the radio station. I don't know. I shall give it some thought, Richie, but, you know, it's a tough one. I think at prep school, I used to think, Mum and I have spoken about this quite a lot when the fella that we referred to in the last hour got sent down. I think at prep school, it wasn't just me being a bit of a loudmouth. It was also the fact that my mum was very, never very backwards in coming forwards. But then as soon as you say something like that, you send an implicit message to some of the lads that did get interfered with, and their mums, that they could have done something differently. So I've tried to abandon that position, actually. I've spoken to Mum about it. I don't think we can console ourselves or even congratulate ourselves on well, he never would have touched me because I'd have swung for him. I'd have screamed the house down. I don't know. It can't be that simple, sadly, because answers would be nice. But I don't know. I'll think on, Richie. I'll think on. Catherine's in Stratford. Catherine, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hi.
Thank you for speaking with me.
You're very welcome.
I was in a convent school with 2 sisters after losing both parents. So this was going to be our new home, our new future, our new beginning of life.
Yes.
I was messed about with by the priest in the convent. Now, the reason you don't tell is because I didn't want my sisters to be next.
Oh.
So I carried on and let it happen. He'd collect me from the dorm in the evenings. We'd go to his parlour. I would do as I was told. And I just kept thinking, if I be quiet, don't make a noise, my sisters will be safe. And they were safe.
Oh, you poor thing.
Okay. But, and a few months ago, I took my sisters to the convent and we watched it be demolished. For my reasons, it was wonderful.
Yeah.
For theirs, they were quite sad because it was their home for a long time.
Do they still not know what you went through?
No, they have no idea.
Have you ever told
they were
anyone?
Much younger. No. No one in the world. But thank you for your programme this morning. It's made me feel like I'm not alone.
You're not.
It wasn't just me.
Oh, God, far from it, actually.
It wasn't just me.
No.
My sisters are happy. They've grown up well. I promised to take care of them. I promised they would be safe after losing parents. And they are. They've grown up happy girls. And that was just my wish. But watching that place go down was wonderful. It was a dream come true. Every brick and every mortar took everything away with it.
Did it really? Because it was interesting, wasn't it? Talking to Andy a minute ago about seeing his abuser be actually sent to prison and it not bringing any comfort. The one thing you learn when you start talking about the darkest corners of humanity is that no 2 people will be the same. No 2 survivors will feel the same. No 2 stories will end the same. And for you, there was a real sense of closure from seeing the building where it happened wiped off the face of the earth.
And everything was gone. Everything went with it when that building came down. If he went to prison, it would have meant he'd be out after a certain amount of time, and he'd be a girthy old man sitting in the room. But, well, we could be doing anything. We don't know.
No.
But his memory, the memories, everything went down with them bricks. That was my way. It was wonderful.
It's a little shaft of light in an almost undiluted hours of darkness.
Tunnel.
Thank you. And you are. No, before you go, I'm going to tell you, you are an amazing woman.
Oh, bless you. Thank you.
To do that for your sisters is almost beyond my comprehension. That is absolutely incredible and so heartbreaking.
We were vulnerable. We had nobody.
But you were
We
immense.
had nothing. It was just us.
How's your life been?
Someone had to. Oh, mine's been good.
Oh, fantastic.
Mine's been good. Mine's been okay, especially the building coming down. It was like, it was a rebirth.
They should have given you that tea thing, you know, on the cartoons with the Roadrunner. You should have had that box with the thing that you push down, the plunger that you push down to blow up the bloody place.
Big red button.
Yes, they should have given it to you, Catherine, but you didn't need it.
No, No, it did everything. But the reason you don't tell, really, James, is you're protecting them around you.
No, you were, but I'm going to go back to what I just said about no two stories being the same. That's why you didn't tell. And that's the most understandable and excusable reason of all. But it's not. I'm not letting any of these people at my school off the hook, because I'm thinking about the bystanders, not the victims, not the survivors, the people who knew. There must have been, forgive me if I speak inappropriately, there must have been nuns in that convent that knew what was happening to you.
There were a few, yes.
They're the ones I can't forgive.
The priest is the boss. The priest is the boss. And whatever he says goes. I mean, we're going back to the 60s, the late 60s, and everything. It was like a doctor with nurses. Them times, if a doctor said jump, you would jump. Same with a priest.
Yeah.
Whatever he said.
Oh, I get it.
He was even my swimming instructor.
Good grief.
And I was always called back after class because I was the best swimmer. I wasn't the best swimmer. My swimming was awful. It was real bad.
Yeah.
But I knew what was next. But it was me or someone else.
Oh, wow.
But thank you for this morning.
Well, thank you for what you...
There are a lot of people.
I know. More than we ever imagined. More than we ever imagined. Thank you, Catherine, and take care. Take care. What an amazing woman. What an amazing human being. 12:55 is the time. I'm almost done, actually. 4 more minutes. 3.5. Then Sheila will be here. I know she has a profound interest in these issues, as I do. And then I'm off on holiday for a couple of weeks. David's in Clapham. Probably the last person I'm going to be able to talk to today, David. What would you like to say?
I'd like to just say, James, I've listened to everybody this morning. I think you're right. There's no two survivors of the same stories. Stories are similar in some situations. I think it wasn't just these institutions where people were abusing people and hiding in plain sight. My abuser got 8 years in a very large institution. A different religion.
Yeah.
But what I think these abusers have done is they've built networks, and they've hidden behind these networks, which includes headmasters, senior management of care homes, and I hate to say there's a number of these people have been facilitators for these people.
Yes.
And in my own case, my abuser was actually reported. It was investigated. But this was after I had left the care home. And he still was able to still work for the care home even after that. So I think there's a failure of the systems, the regulatory systems. There's a failure of...
Well, this is what's so terrifying about the report, because one of the schools, not the one I went to, but Downside, still hasn't separated governance from secular to clerical. It's still got the trustees, the overarching authority that runs the school is still dominated by members of the clergy. So the self-interest and the self-protection, even if they're not facilitating things, David, which they certainly are, but even the ones that aren't, they're thinking about, well, here's the line. This is the line that makes me want to really scream. They prioritised the monks and their own reputations over the protection of children.
And that is what all these institutions have done over the years, from the 50s, 60s, even before that. But the thing I think that's really important today is the safeguarding of the children of tomorrow.
Yes, you're right. That's why we're talking about it.
And it's above these institutions that, and if these institutions do not have proper safeguarding mechanisms in place for reporting and everything else, then I would say that these institutions should no longer be looking after children or teaching children.
No, this is what we've been on much more easier subjects to discuss. We did mention earlier in the programme that sometimes you feel you need absolute root and branch reform rather than just tweaking or changes of personnel. David, thank you. Thank you everyone who's called me today, and thank you especially to everyone who's worried about me. I'll be all right. Crikey. But if you have been affected by any of what you've heard today, there are various organisations that can help you. The Truth Project is the one that's linked to and is part of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. By sharing their experiences, victims and survivors make an important contribution to the work of the inquiry, and their experiences will feed into and influence, they tell me, our findings and recommendations. So when David talks about building a different future, you have to take this in good faith and think that they are the people who perhaps can help do it. Find out more anyway at truthproject.org.uk. I'm sorry, Peter and Paul and John and Clark and Janet and David and Hope and John and everybody else that I haven't been able to talk to today. I know Shelagh Fogarty is going to be continuing on the same theme. I am off on my holidays for 2 weeks and 1 day. I'll be back the Tuesday after the August bank holiday. I have the best job in the world, and I'm really grateful to you.
Let's hear from Clark in Pembrokeshire. Hello, Clark.
Hello, Shelagh. Thanks for taking my call. I've been listening for a couple of hours now. I was abused when I was 13. I was groomed over a number of weeks. There was myself and some friends used to go to a small pond fishing, and it just happened that this guy would turn up in a British gas van. He would just talk about the fishing and you know, the lake and everything. Told us all that he was going to take it on, he was going to rent it out and this, that and the other. To which we all believed. We had no reason not to believe him. I mean, this was about 1979, 1980. I mean, I'm 50 odd now. I didn't talk about it for 37 years. I went up to the lake on my own. This guy turned up and we were chatting and he said, "Oh, look, is there some better spots around the other side in the wooded area?" I said, "Oh, yeah," took him round. Next thing I knew was I was being, semi-conscious, badly beaten, having my clothes ripped off, and then obviously the rape happened. Then he proceeded to kick me a lot on the floor and stamp on me. He went and drove off. I told my parents I'd had a cycle accident. I kept quiet. Told my grandmother, who was probably in her late 80s, 90s, and I don't think she even understood what I was saying. But she took that secret to her grave. I told my sister, who unfortunately she had a bit of a drink problem when I was married, and she was having a drink with my now ex-wife and told her.
And you hadn't told your wife?
No, never told my wife, and
because
we had two children. I was ashamed. I didn't want to admit what had happened to me, the fact that another man had done that to me. I felt dirty. I've always felt really guilty, thinking that if I'd have spoken up like some of the other people, that maybe I'd have saved somebody else from the abuse and rape that I
can I do you a favour and you perhaps do yourself a favour and focus just on your needs and the hurt that you experienced, because that at this point, Clark, is all I'm interested in, because that silence that you imposed on yourself, it didn't come out of nowhere, did it? It came from the atmosphere of the time. It came from your sense of your family, what they couldn't cope with, all kinds of things. And this isn't to blame anybody. Many people would have done what you did. Clearly, many people do what you did.
Well, my then wife couldn't cope with it, and the fact that we'd been married for 17 years. She asked me to leave.
What couldn't she cope with, Clark?
She in her mind, she felt that I'd deceived her, that I'd never confided in her.
When you said
divorce,
when you said why you hadn't, that didn't satisfy her, no?
No, she felt very angry, very almost betrayed that I'd not shared some of my deepest past. The fact that she felt that I couldn't share it with her, that obviously I didn't trust her or something like this. She proceeded to get a 16-year-old and 12-year-old and made me tell them face to face.
Made you tell them?
What had happened, yeah.
Did she not show you any compassion?
No. It was, on her part, it was more anger, because she couldn't understand why I couldn't trust her. That's where she was coming from. My eldest daughter is about 26 now. We haven't spoken in 10 years. My son, he's about 20 now. He, again, doesn't want to know me. I've moved on. I'm remarried. I've got three more boys and some stepkids. And I mean, I'd die if somebody even looked at my kids wrong. You know, I'd do time if somebody touched my kids.
I'm so sorry that for your, you know, because for you, speaking about it to your sister has been catastrophic for your life, hasn't it?
Yeah, basically. I've grown up with behavioural problems, anger problems. You know, it cost me my marriage, my job, my everything. House.
Your relationship with your children, the first.
Yeah. I mean, 10 years. They haven't spoken to me. They just cut me off completely. My daughter had therapy apparently because she couldn't come to terms with what I'd been through, but she also couldn't come to terms with speaking to me.
But it sounds like the atmosphere in which she learnt about it was quite antagonistic, rather than compassionate.
Yeah,
which won't help.
My ex-wife turned out to be incredibly angry about the whole thing, and almost berated me like I was a small child again. You know, that I'd betrayed her by not taking her into the confidence, and all these years, you know, I could have been one of those but she wouldn't have known. But
it seems to me she made your sorrow and your pain about her, which is strange.
Yeah, I've never come to terms with that as to why, because it just blew. I didn't even know that she'd been told, and separation, then divorce, and everything came so quickly.
It's like a continuation of the attack, isn't it? In a way.
Yeah.
And now this consequence, and now this consequence, and now this consequence.
Yeah, I mean, I did anger management. I got therapy. One therapist actually wanted to video me while I was talking about the abuse and then play it back to me. And I just got up and left because I felt that sort of therapy was more destructive than therapy.
You have to feel comfortable with it for sure. So, Clark, I'm so sorry for what's happened to you, but your call, more than any that I've taken actually, has explained the silence to me. You know, because as somebody whose first instinct about anything is to open her mouth and talk, I have been mystified. I mean, I understand the behaviour of abusers and what they do to make children stay quiet and everything, but yours was such a violent attack by a relative stranger. There was no real obvious intellectual reason for you to stay silent, and yet silence was your only choice at the time, it felt.
Because I felt dirty. I mean, I'd not even gone through puberty at that point, so I didn't even know what
was going on.
What was going on. You know, I only told my parents about 3 years ago. They're in the 70s, and my father couldn't cope with it. He left the room straight away. My mother recalled the day that I came back. I had a dislocated shoulder, broken arm, fractured kneecap. I had all sorts of injuries.
Dear me.
And she recalls, she said, well, do you come off your bike? And I said, no, this is actually what happened.
How did they cope subsequently with that knowledge?
I think they're how do you put it? They were partly disgusted that I couldn't tell them, but very hurt, very ashamed that they couldn't do anything about it.
That they hadn't been there to help you?
Yeah.
But they didn't know, did they? Clark, I'm so sorry. You've been through absolute hell. Absolute hell. And a long time ago, and yet it still reduces you to tears.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, please don't say sorry. I'm going to leave it there with you, Clark, in an on-air sense. Anyway, we'll look after Clark off-air, but we don't need to continue the conversation when Clark is in such great distress. What an appalling attack, and to think in that moment of that attack, that lifetime of shame that was handed on. The shame is all in the abuser. The shame is all the abusers, and it's just handed over like a vicious gift to the person they abuse. And that's what Clark and many of you calling today have lived with. Absolutely appalling. What do we do to make sure that nobody is silent about this again? We began this programme talking about the silence that hangs over child sexual abuse, and lots of you, none more so than Clark just a few moments ago, are making it clear to me how deeply that silence runs in you and why it runs so deeply in you. And the another word that crops up a lot is shame, and it really pains me to think. I understand why people who've been abused feel shame. Of course I understand that, but it really upsets me, it bothers me enormously to think that they do, because the shame is not yours, and the responsibility for other people's feelings about what's happened to you is not yours. When you were a child, it wasn't yours, and now you're an adult, it isn't yours. How other people feel is their business. If you need to speak up about it, and so many of you have needed to speak up about it one way or another, if not to your abuser or to your family, then you've gone and done it with someone else, a trusted friend or a therapist. I think we can all agree that the silence is what makes everything worse for you. And although Clark found that the fact of speaking up to his sister backfired on him eventually, there was a different way of speaking up that he chose not to take because of shame, because of the damage that had been done to him as a 13, 14-year-old boy. So silence and shame. We are getting there. We have come some way, I think, in sort of shaking off that silence and shaking off that shame. But not far enough and not quickly enough. Anna has called from Crouch End and Jane in Haywards Heath. Anna, first of all, hello.
Hello, Sheila. You were talking about empowering people. And I know we've all been rendered mute, and I feel for Craig and for Paul, who've just phoned you. But this is slightly different. My two daughters in the 70s were 11 and 5. And the 11-year-old had just come home from school, just got off the bus, and she came home and she said, "Oh, I've been followed by a strange boy." And I really didn't take much notice. She was confident and came in and we made tea and things. And then I realized that my younger daughter was riding her tricycle round outside. And she suddenly came and ran in, very distressed, and said that a boy had been talking to her and he tried to bribe her. And she said he'd bribed her with berries and with, I think, a 10p coin, if they were in the 70s. I think they probably just were. I didn't want to, at 5-year-old, it's a sensitive matter.
But just to be clear, she gave you reason to think it was a sexual appeal from this boy.
Well, it would. I had the impression that it wasn't. That she was fearful, and neither actually were abused by him as it happened. But he tried, and he had said to her, "Do you want a 4-star?" And she said, "What is a?" And so I realized what had happened. And so when I sort of pulled myself together, I thought she described him, and she described the satchel that he carried and a book he was carrying. And I said to her, "Can you draw the book?" And she did, but she drew the whole picture of the boy, the hairstyle, the trousers he was wearing, the fact that he had one shoelace unlaced. And I was thinking, where do I take it from here? Because in the 70s, There was really no red
It was
car.
less clear. It was less clear, wasn't it?
Completely. And you know, when you phoned the police, the police would arrive in uniform, in a police car, you know, and you don't want this for your 5-year-old daughter to be interrogated, you know, about this. But in the end, I did phone the police, and I asked to speak to the chief of police at the local station, because I felt if he tries this with another child, I'm going to feel guilty. You know, I need to say it to somebody, even if I don't approve of their methods, because, you know, there was no psychology much around in those days.
And did you speak about it?
I did speak to him, and he was a very sensitive person, as it happened. And he said to me, I understand why you don't want her interviewed by the police. And I mentioned this drawing that she'd done, and he said, children of that age do amazingly accurate drawings. They are absolutely fantastic. But unfortunately, we're not allowed to use in evidence anything from a child under the age of 12. I don't know whether that's still applicable or not. But I would say that if parents have a suspicion about something, don't say draw him, but draw his shoes or draw
the situation.
It's not so threatening. You know,
and were your girls, presumably you as any parent would have been, were super watchful afterwards, even more so?
Yes, not only that. I mean, I was manager of a children's home locally, a volunteer manager. And there were children there who had come from abusive homes. And I used to go there, and I remember doing flower arranging there. And I was stripping lilies of leaves one day, and there was a small boy. He would have been about 4 or 5 with learning difficulties. And as I was stripping the leaves, he was taking them from me, and he was saying, Uncle Robert, Auntie Amy, Auntie Rose, Crispin, you know, different
naming people.
Names of naming people. And he said to me, they are all in bed. And he took another leaf and he said, and that's the baby, and he can't get out.
And that's him, probably the baby. Anna, thank you. I'm going to leave it there if I may. Thank you very much for your call, Anna in Crouch End. Lots of you very affected by Clark's call, and Paul, the police officer before him as well, and sending good wishes to them. So let me on air pass those on to you and to all of you who are calling. And we'll talk more about this, because I can't tell you how many calls are coming in on this subject. Let me give you 2 numbers, 2 helpful numbers. The Samaritans, if you need them, 116 123 project, which is connected to the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse. Their number is 0800 917 1000. I'll repeat both of those numbers and an email address as well before 3. Can I just take the time, Clark, I hope you're still listening, and to all of you who've called, but the response to Clark's call just 10 minutes ago or so, and again, I'm bound to say a bit of a health warning for some of the things we're talking about today, if you have children in the room. But then again, it's important that children know. We have to tell them in an appropriate way, of course, and we have to tell them in a way that doesn't terrify them and they can still happily lead their lives. But we have to let very small children know about abuse, because very small children are abused. And Clark, if you're still listening, I can't tell you how many people are tweeting just me directly, as well as LBC directly, to send their love to you and to send their respect, actually, as much as anything else, out to you for speaking the way that you did on air, and also for just living your life and still surviving and still trying to live a life after what you went through, a horrific attack at the age of 13. And that silence that I've been talking about since 1 o'clock with you, that silence that hangs over the entire subject of child sexual abuse. We've started, and only just started, I think, as a society to speak about it even near properly. But it's not about whether it's proper or not. It's about whether it's effective in protecting children or not. That is the only ambition that I have in having conversations like this. And Sue has very kindly sent me the details. I'm just cursing down to find it. The details of this PANTS campaign I mentioned. Sue Crocombe, thank you. The PANTS campaign by the NSPCC has helped over 400,000 parents across the UK talk to their children about sexual abuse. I'm just retweeting what Sue has sent me, but you'll find it on the NSPCC website as well. If you're a parent who's struggling with how you're going to talk to your children about this without alarming them, that campaign will go some way to helping you, I'm sure. And not all parents will find it difficult to talk about this. There are ways of speaking to children about this. And the most important way, it seems to me, is to tell them they can use their voice whenever they want, whenever they need to speak up to protect themselves or to protect someone else. Now, instantly, is a good time to talk. That's the first protection you give your child. You give them the voice. And if they're clumsy and they get it wrong sometimes, so be it. Give them a voice. Don't create silence. Jane in Haywards Heath, hello.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my call, Sheila.
It's my pleasure. You have experienced abuse as well, Jane.
Yeah, in the late 1970s, between the age of 11 and 13, I used to be sent to a friend that sort of befriended my family for about 2 years, but I didn't actually recognise it as abuse because I didn't really know. At a Catholic school, we kind of knew what intercourse was, but that was it. And it wasn't until 16 that I recognised it as abuse. I knew I didn't like it, and I confided in a friend in school that this man was making me get in bed with him. And she subsequently took that information and told all the other girls in my class, who, you know, all had a very negative opinion of what we've been taught about, you know, sex or being in bed with the opposite sex, and consequently sent me to Coventry for 6 months with no one in my class spoke to me. I used to get letters in my notes on my desk calling me, you know, sort of obscene names. I didn't understand, so it made me even more scared to tell anyone because I thought I've obviously done this really dreadful thing. And when I did sort of pluck up the courage to say to my parents that I really didn't want to visit this man's house anymore, all I could explain was that he tried to be like my dad. Like, that's the only way I could resonate, you know, his sort of behaviour towards me.
Too close.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Clearly worse than that in reality, but that was what you were trying to say to your parents.
Yes, and I like I say, I didn't recognise it as abuse. He was sort of touching me and what he was doing with me, but he was also taking me out to really nice places, and, you know, my parents were sending me there, so it all seemed like, you know, whatever he was doing was okay. And then eventually, when I was sort of saying to my parents, I don't want to go there anymore, my dad was a policeman, and he tried to sort of push the point, and my mum just blocked it completely. And so then I again got this sort of feeling that I was doing something wrong. And then when I got to 16 and started being involved with boys, and you know, they tried to sort of touch me or, you know, be sort of a bit more intimate, then I would just bash them.
You just freaked out.
Totally. And then I recognised this as abuse and went back to my mother and sort of said that this guy, he's a paedophile. And she just said, like, don't be so ridiculous, you know, and she just wouldn't even have the conversation. And so all the messages I got were just that what happened was completely acceptable, that, you know, I didn't have a voice. I didn't have, you know, every reaction I got from people I told was negative.
You were told to shush, weren't you?
Yeah, you know, and you kind of convince yourself that it wasn't really that bad when actually it was. And it was only really until, I'd say in the last sort of 3 to 5 years that I've actually recognised that it was a really bad thing that happened to me. And
has affected you very deeply.
Yeah, horrendously, and how much it does affect you in your relationships, and you are pretending all the time. There's a level of fakeness in everything you do. But equally, you know, you have an opportunity to sort of, move on from it and have a family of your own and make sure that they're protected.
And have you done that?
And I have done that.
So you've got that happiness?
I have got that happiness.
Which is
I have
lovely.
Horrendous resentment towards
your parents?
My parents. And, you know, haven't had the courage to be able to tell them, because I feel that they would just make it into a drama of their own.
Can I ask you, Jane, because what I'm trying to work out as I speak to you and others is how far we've come from the 70s, say, because a lot of you are ringing in and the abuse took place in the 70s or early 80s. When you said you didn't recognise it as abuse, I mean, you recognised it as something you didn't want and you recognised it as something you were uncomfortable with. Is that because you had never heard of child abuse? Is that because nobody had ever spoken to you about sexual activity and who does and doesn't get to do it with you, and how you ultimately say every single time who does and doesn't get to touch you? And had you never heard those words?
No, I'd never heard those words. And the training that you would get in school would be about intercourse. You know, you'd know about the reproductive system, and that's it.
And was it presented as intercourse is something that you mustn't do?
Yes, very negative. You know, that you had to be married. We were in Catholic school. You know, that girls, you know, doing that would be kind of, you know, sort of ejected from the school. You know, that you could get pregnant and.
So they taught you to protect yourself from yourself, when in fact you didn't need protecting from yourself. You needed protecting from other people around you.
Yeah, and this is my worry with like the children now, is that you know, people sort of saying that they don't need to, you know, being told about sort of sexual education too early, but they need to know everything, you know.
Because imagine if, you know, you said between 11 and 13 was when this situation arose for you. Can you imagine if from the age of, say, 7, you and your mum and dad and the school, and even if your mum and dad were uncomfortable, as lots of parents are, the school had an environment in which you had been able to say and discuss with kind, trained, expert teachers about your body's integrity and privacy and what you know, and who was in charge of it, i.e. you. And imagine if you had that dialogue in your head for 7 years, 6-7 years before this incident happened. You'd have had a much quicker understanding of its wrongness and your right to speak up about its wrongness, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and also even sort of the side of grooming, you know, that you know, there's so many elements to getting that trust from that child.
He took you out to nice places, you said.
Yeah, my parents sent me there. He used to write to me. You know, I had full attention, which I didn't feel I had when I was at home. And, you know, he put me on a pedestal, you know, but he also groomed me sexually by showing explicit photos and making it okay and talking about it. He took pictures of me. So it all led to, you know, it going on to sort of further, going on to the abuse. But that took probably 6 months. You know, so even recognising those traits in people, you know, even parents to recognise those traits in people, to be a bit more suspicious about why is that 60-year-old man interested in taking my child here or there. And I know, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, you know, have those relationships, but
we need to know why. We need to know why, and we need to know the nature of the person who's with our children. Absolutely, we do. Jane, again, thank you very much for your call, and I'm so sorry that the distress you've experienced over the years. Jane, calling from Haywards Heath. My heart goes out to your last caller, Clark. This was sent earlier on, and lots of texts and tweets coming in, thanking all of you who were speaking on air about this. It is not your fault, is the message coming through in lots of texts.